I am not going to introduce the speakers. I'm going to let them just walk up in the order and introduce themselves. Do not take that as a double standard. It is in the service of time. In my remarks, I was meant to also interrogate or question each of the 4 speakers. We're not going to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to do the first session, take a break, then we're going to do the second session, and then all 9 people are going to come up together, which will give you all an opportunity to ask a question. And then we hope we'll get our time back. So again, apologies particularly to those who came back early. So we remember what you said. There may be questions, and please, we'll pass the microphone around. I would like to begin a sentence, and I'd like each of you to finish the sentence. Okay? To achieve the promise of the Museum of the Future, we must
make sure that not only our museums, but our countries and our continents remain accessible to the world. And no, I just had to finish the phrase, right? Or do we have to explain anything?
No, you just say there'll be, was that a comma or a period?
Colon.
You can come back.
I think that we should make them free on very different levels, which means accessible, contextually accessible for everyone who is going to share the democratic ideas, and accessible the results of our researches, of our activities in a sort of, I don't know, for example, digital galleries, to open our content in open access to everyone who is interested in, and not to charge for this.
I would say that we should seek and find the right balance between reaching out to the audience, satisfying the expectations of the audience in making the museums as open, as attractive and as accommodating as possible, but at the same time being quite consistent about conveying the message which we want to share. And it's not always easy. I think that there is some contradiction between becoming an open museum and the museum with a consistent message. And I would add the third thing, which might seem banal and obvious, to be independent from the government, from the politicians, from the those who decide about the funding, the structure of the museums. I used to live in the country in which it all seemed also obvious, and just in 1 week it turned out to be something not that obvious, and even the question of life or death for museums and for the other institutions of culture.
I think for a future museum we should be more upfront in developing new political languages that would depend on unexpected constellations, not only in terms of objects but also ideas, and that would work on to relate, let's say not divide but relate, because this is what is desperately needed right now. But it's not only about the access, but it's also about creating a complex political language that can be an alternative to the banal language of politics that is used today. And I think it's only museums involving cultural institutions can do that. So we should be more upfront about that.
Thank you. So I'm happy to throw it open in case there are questions. One first and then 2 there.
Thank you very much. My name is George Abungu. I'm from Kenya. I wasn't here yesterday, so maybe I should have waited to hear someone ask questions before I do, but I'm excited. First of all, let me say thank you very much for the fantastic presentations we've had this morning. I mean, this is a very intellectually charged kind of discussion, but beyond that, I think that it relates to us and our needs as museum people and also as communities. I just have one little thing, just listening to what you have just said, starting from your point, and I want to pick it on the word of the language. You've talked about the political language. I would look at it differently. I think it's the language that we speak within the museum sector. Because when we say we must, our language, or our this, or we should, who are we? Do you see yourself as different, totally different animals from the rest? And when you say we will be able to give back to places where they can manage, who has given you that authority? And who are you as connected or as related to the others you are talking about? I think it is our language we must change, and I would like to hear your opinion on this. I think unless we change the language of communication with the communities that we serve and remove ourselves from that isolation of us as museum, who by the virtue of being in the museum, we all of a sudden we have this knowledge that nobody else has. I'm not sure that we are going to move away. We will continue talking to ourselves, talking that language and pretending that we are doing something. And I think the first question is to ask, who are we? Are we part of the community, or we are totally different animals that have been brought up all these years and see ourselves as different, and we are the only ones who can give it to the others. We are the only ones who can develop the narratives. We are the only ones who can be able to provide the answers to the others. Thank you.
Super pertinent statement and question. Actually, I'm afraid when I say we, I mean us. Colleagues, I think etymologically speaking, colleague comes from cousin. So it's a family. I say we, but I mean all of us, in a way. Perhaps rather all of us in relation to those who we don't reach. And I think the fact that you sit here is already ample proof that we're all part of the we, with the little shades to the left or to the right. But there's a little novel that came out in 2015 by a French author, Arnaud Bertinin, which is called Des Lions pour des danseuses. And it tells a story, and it's a kind of fable of a group in a Bamileke group in Bangulab who writes to the Quai Branly saying, you have some very important objects from us. Don't you think we should have free access? And the Quai Branly thinks, oh, there's something wrong with this. Let's not answer. So in the end they have to answer, and they say, okay, you have free access. And then they go on and say, well, don't you think we should all have access to your museum, because there are things from our culture there. And it goes on. And then they say, why, you have important stuff from our side. Why don't we have your Mona Lisa for some time? And we'll show the way we think is right, and we put the right narrative around it. And in the end, what it actually ends up is that there is free access to Europe. Because the greatest number of encyclopedic museums is in Europe. So Europe should be free. And I think that is such a fantastic little tale that says so much about the real implications and real issues when we talk about sharing and participating. You can take this on a metaphorical level and symbolic level and Well, what does that really mean, concretely speaking? And that's why I say, you know, and that's thinking of the title of this colloquium. Well, what is the role of the encyclopedic museums? Do they have a political role? Can they hammer home a certain message to parliaments, to governments, and say, the future is not in closing up. The future is not in pulling up walls. If you want to have a future as a country and as a continent, you better open up. Because otherwise, you just recede into oblivion. And live up to that challenge.
Anybody else?
I just wanted to add something. I see your point, and I think that if we are speaking about we are, from time to time, I have the feeling that we are engaging ourselves just with what matters to us, and we should focus actually on those who are not obvious visitors of our institutions, and that there is a majority of the society which doesn't come to any museum. So shouldn't we take it from time to time into consideration that there are another voices that we should hear, that we should listen to in order to change our language? So just as an addition to this.
I would say that I didn't have a feeling creating the Museum of the Second World War that I am a representative of an isolated professional, group of curators of history or historians which are who are doing something, secret, distant from the public. My experience is that creating the historical museum in Poland became such a public issue which got involved so many people into the creation of this museum. For example, we created our collection from scratch. Now we have 40,000 items in our stocks. The permanent exhibition has got 2,000 items, and almost in each case people came to the museum, donated objects, shared the stories. Sometimes, very often, these objects were the most sacred family relics. Some, relics of the fathers, grandfathers, grandmothers who were inmates of the concentration camps or who were killed by the Germans or by the Soviets. So I had a feeling that creating the museum was a grassroots process to some extent, and so many people were involved in it that it was not just a one-dimensional process of some professional, isolated group creating the museum. I even thought that this process became too public and epitomized too many divergent, interests that to some extent this museum didn't have enough peace, tranquility to be opened in normal situation. It was created and opened under the huge stress and with a great social interest, grassroots interest. So my experience is that history matters and museum matters a lot. Sometimes I had the feeling they matter too much.
Okay. I would say for me, when I use the word to relate, it is very much coming from the ideas of Glissant and his one-worldliness. And he speaks of how the majority thinks still in this Enlightenment language in relationship with image and in relationship with language also. And it is a sort of language that is about the transparency but not opacity. So we should have our right. Everybody should have their right, like the opacity. I think when I speak about a more complex political language, a new political language, it is very much involving the way to relate to the communities without turning them into these exotic objects. Because when you speak of the locale or like the community, these things can really, in the curatorial lingo, these things can really also turn into like these exotic objects, like that everybody wants to get involved with. So, but when I think of like the relation and opacity, like together with the right to opacity and that relate, I think such a problem can be overcome. And it's, of course, it's more political, but it's also more poetical at the same time, if it answers your question.
Thank you. I would like to raise a problem concerning democracy, the relation between museum and democracy, in that we speak all the day about encyclopedia, and the word encyclopedia, which is a Greek word, and I think there's no Greek person here today. I didn't encounter one, but encyclopedia comes from paideia, which means education, relation to children, paides. And so an encyclopedic museum has an educational function, but well, we shouldn't take it literally. That means it has a resistance. A museum resists. A museum is a problem. You know, you come to the museum and you encounter things which are not just what you encounter in a dinnery life, but they resist. They put a problem in front of you. You have to work with them. It's a work. Going to a museum is a sort of work, and this resistance is in a contrast to the problem of public. You know, you have to have numbers of visitors to prove that you are really good for the community. And so you have, in a way, you have not to resist too much. I think this is a dialectic which is very much felt in European and American museums. Whereas when we hear Turkish, Polish colleagues speaking about their experience, it's quite different. They have an experience, they have very active, I was very impressed with your presentation this morning, a very active way of having a message and being, you know, polemic, very heavily polemic sometimes, and you have political problems.
I'm going to gently move you to a question.
Okay, you're right. So I would like you to speak about this resistance of museum as you feel it, and its encyclopedic function in the very literal sense of the word.
Sorry, can you just phrase that as a question? Just pose the question. I'm not. Just want to make sure that you get a response to what you want.
Well, what is your how do you conceive of the encyclopedic, educational, and resisting function of your museums?
Why don't we start on that side?
You best. Start with the most colorful one. The pink.
The most colorful one.
Okay, I would say that, as I also underlined in my talk, for me as the museum is just almost like a kind of a non-existent physicality in most of the cases in Turkey, in terms of art, not in terms of archaeology, but in terms of, we're speaking about art. I see that this also is an advantage and disadvantage at the same time. Disadvantage is not being able to, of course, work on different projects that would change the context, but at the same time, it gives an ability cognitively to think about museum everywhere, not only limited to the physical space, and like understanding publicness also in the museum sense. So it is already, when you think like that, it already becomes a matter of resistance anyway. So sometimes the context, despite it's very heavy, it gives you the tools if you know how you can use them. So that would be my answer.
You ask about democracy, about encyclopedia, and about resistance. And I would answer this very complicated question by saying that I did my best to create the historical museum which would reflect the level of historical knowledge And I believed that the exhibition should be created by historians, by designers, and that we could do it independently from any political influence. And when we were very close to finish our job, just at the last stage of creating the museum, the new understanding of culture, museums, and history happened to be prevalent in our country, and the clash between our understanding of the museums, of the history, and the encyclopedia understood as the knowledge and as an objective knowledge was confronted with the understanding of the democracy given by the Minister of Culture, who gave a speech in the parliament saying that his party won the democratic election, which is true, and has got the popular mandate to change the exhibition of the Museum of the Second World War and to change all the exhibitions in all the museums in Poland. So is it democratic or not? In a certain sense, this is the essence of democracy. You won the election, so you can do whatever you want in your country and in your museums. And I refuse to accept such the understanding of democracy, and I did my best to open this museum without any support of my government, and I did not accept any changes in the exhibition, and perhaps it was undemocratic, because we opened the museum against our own government, which had the democratic mandate. But the question is, what means the democracy? What means having the majority in the parliament? Does it mean that that such a government has got the right to interfere in any, sphere of culture?
Nothing to add.
Luckily enough.
Well, I think that this is very individual, actually, and from my point of view, I don't see such a great controversy between resistance and attendance, or, well, democratical approach. So, but it's very different, I have to admit, yeah.
But, it's interesting that you say museum is about work. That's quite a specific notion. I don't think that 6.5 million people walking through our doors come to the museum because they want to work. That's, we could ask back, what makes you say this? It's about work. You don't need to answer that. But I just want to highlight that there is so many ways of encountering or experiencing something in a museum and making a really decisive experience, either through study or through epiphany, because something suddenly hits you. And then this will take its path through your mind and through your heart, and you will keep on going. And if you're a scholar, you will work. Most of our visitors are not scholars. They encounter the resistance of those objects, the opacity, the fact that everything is quite strange. It's not obvious that you have a relationship to it, but you can. And the museum offers that possibility like no other place, I think. That the objects, and in a way the objects as representatives of a culture, have a life of their own, because that is what resistance is about, that you accept and that you respect that they are specific, and you cannot simply use them for whatever purpose. And that resistance turns into the experience of respect and freedom in a way. It can. That's what the museum offers, and that is why, in a way, inscribed in the museum as a public institution, through resistance, you can make that experience of liberty, I think, respect. That's quite a democratic function, I think. There's no guarantee that it happens. But a museum offers this opportunity or the possibility, like few institutions do, I think. You cannot force it.
Sorry, we're going to have to move on. just come up afterwards and engage. But we're going to move from this to our afternoon session. Thank you very, very much. Thank you to the people.